Hi, this is Kent, and welcome to another session of Deepening Your Spiritual Toolbox. Today we're going to be talking about how to cultivate our soul. And many of the great religious traditions, in fact, all the great religious traditions teach that we each have a soul. And within my own Judeo-Christian tradition, it is taught that within each person is the very breath of God. Within each person is the divine spark of the sacred. And that if we believe that to be true, that we each have inherent worth, meaning, and purpose. And that all of creation, all of our fellow human beings have inherent worth as well. And it has profound implications for how we are to look at ourselves, how we are to value ourselves, but how we are to value others, those who are like us and those who are different than us. And so today we're going to be talking about how do we cultivate, nurture our soul. There's a wonderful story that has been attributed to an indigenous people in South America, where they would go from place to place. And as they traveled, they never had a permanent home. As they traveled from place to place, they would move quickly. They would move with discipline. But every several days, they would stop and rest for a few days. They would set up their camp. And when it was asked, why did they have this pattern of moving so decisively and so quickly and then resting, their response was, we need to allow time for our souls to catch up with us. We need to allow time for our souls to catch up with us. So the question I pose to myself and I pose for all of us this day is, how do we slow down long enough to allow our souls to catch up with us? Yesterday I was on Highway 128, Interstate 95, and I was heading up towards New Hampshire. But I had to skirt along the city of Boston. And as I was heading towards New Hampshire, I saw that the traffic from New Hampshire and other places heading into the city of Boston was back to back, bumper to bumper. And it was really the first time since the pandemic that I saw what seemed to be pre-pandemic traffic. So many more people going to go about their work in the city of Boston. And that makes sense, right? We see the light at the end of the tunnel. The vaccine is being rolled out with more and more effectiveness. And so people are getting back to a routine that was normal before the pandemic began. And as the vaccine is rolled out more and more, I think the pace of life will only accelerate further. So a question that is relevant for our time, what are some lessons that we take from this pandemic year? There is so much we wish had not happened. We do not want to romanticize in the least all the pain and all the dislocation that happened during this pandemic year. Yet there are also lessons to be gleaned from this time of isolation, this time of enforced slowing down for many of us. Lessons that we may want to hold on to, that may enrich our lives going forward. And I think one of the lessons for many of us, not all of us, but for many of us who had the luxury of being able to work at home, or for those of us who were, for that matter, forced out of work, one of the things we've experienced is a slower pace, whether we wanted it or not. So how do we cultivate our soul? And what lessons can we glean from this challenging year that we want to hold on to as we move into the new normal, as life begins to ratchet up and the pace accelerates? To cultivate the soul is an invitation to continue to slow down. And prayer is one way of helping us to slow down, helping us to listen for the movement of that great mystery we call God spirit. There's this wonderful quote from the monk, the Trappist monk and mystic and author, James Finley. He was a student of the great Trappist monk, Thomas Merton. And he had this conversation with Merton when he was just learning how to be a monk. And Thomas Merton, the great Trappist master, was guiding James Finley in his early spiritual life. James Finley writes, Merton once told me, James, stop trying to pray so hard. And then he asked a question, how does an apple ripen? How does an apple ripen? It simply rests in the sun. And then James Finley goes on to reflect upon these words of Thomas Merton. A small green apple cannot ripen in one night by tightening all its muscles, squinting its eyes, and tightening its jaw in order to find itself the next morning miraculously large, red, ripe, and juicy beside its small green counterparts. James Finley goes on to say, like the birth of a baby or the opening of a rose, the birth of the true self takes place only in God's time. We must wait for God. We must be awakened. We must trust in God's hidden action within us. I love that phrase, the birth of one's true self. And then he says we must wait for God. We must be awake. We must trust in God's hidden work. Do you and I believe that God's bringing about a new work in us? Do we believe that that great mystery we call God's Spirit is cultivating, nurturing, nourishing the soul that resides within each one of us? How do we listen? How do we trust that God is bringing about a new work? I'm sharing this in the midst of a forest not far from my home, and the signs of spring are breaking forth. The skunk cabbage just to my right in a wetlands is now breaking forth through the mud where only a week ago it was hidden. The jack in the pulpit, the trillium are beginning to break through the crust of the earth, where just a few days ago, if you looked, you would just see black, dark mud. But underneath all that is in this beautiful natural world, the workings of sap going through the trees, the birds making their nests, the plants coming out from the seemingly dormant earth, is a reminder that there is so much hidden seemingly, but full of life, full of abundance. We are called to trust, Thomas Merton says to James Finley, the monk, to believe that within our lives, God is also at work, cultivating and stirring to life our souls, inspiring our thoughts, minds, and imaginations to new ways of feeling and being. And do you and I believe that to be true? So how do we cultivate our soul? How do we allow, in the words of our indigenous sisters and brothers, to allow our souls to catch up with us? How do we move beyond our dreams and schemes and preoccupations and schedules to allow that great mystery we call the Creator to awaken us to new ways of seeing, new ways of being, new ways of living, new ways of imagining? The first step is to slow down. And that takes discipline. During this pandemic, many of us haven't had much of a choice. We had to slow down. But going forward, it will be a choice in our parts. And it will be, secondly, the choice to listen. Thomas Keating, the Trappist monk, said God's first language is silence. And everything else is a poor translation. We are simply to spend time listening to what's going on within us, our worries, our anxieties, our concerns, our hopes, and our dreams, and to lift all that up to God, to listen, and then to focus on cultivating that listening so that we can listen more deeply. Within my Christian tradition, there is what is called centering prayer. Now, I am not the most disciplined guy you will ever meet. But what I try to do 3 or 4 times a week is to spend 20 to 30 minutes in centering prayer. And simply what that means is to find a favorite chair, or as the days are getting warmer, go out in a quiet place in my garden or my back deck with a good hot cup of coffee, and to become quiet, to be in a place with minimal distractions. And I choose a sacred word, a word to calm my mind. It's any word that speaks. It could be love or peace or hope or God. And then when my mind starts to race, what the Buddhists call the monkey mind, where my dreams and schemes and worries and anxieties move through the canopy of my mind like a monkey going through the canopy of a forest, moving from branch to branch to branch. As I find my mind beginning to race, I return to my sacred word. And if my word is calm, in the quiet of my mind, I repeat that word, calm, calm. Or if my word is peace, peace, peace. And it brings me back into the moment. All the great contemplative traditions teach it's not in the past or it's not in the future where we experience God, but we experience the God, the sacred, the Spirit in this very moment. And that's what I think in part it means to cultivate our soul, to allow our soul to catch up with us, is to spend intentional time slowing down and then listening and developing a meditation process that works for you. There are many different meditation methodologies. You can talk to people that you trust who you think have a deep spiritual life. You can go online and look at different meditative practices. But the purpose of the meditative practice is to spend time being quiet and to go deeper into the silence. That's what centering prayer does. 20 to 30 minutes, just sitting quietly. And when your mind starts to race, using your sacred word to return you to the moment. And then to trust, as James Finley and Thomas Merton would teach us, that God is bringing about a new work in each one of us. That is what James Finley calls God's hidden action within each of our lives, each of our souls. Now, where that hidden action will take us, only God knows. We can't control it. We can't harness it. We need simply to trust that the God who created the heavens and the earth, created the wonder of this forest, is bringing about a new work in us. You go into your backyard garden today, and it may look like there's not much going on. Maybe a few daffodils have come up if you're here in New England. But things still look pretty dormant. It seems like winter still has a hold. But just under the surface, as the days lengthen and the dirt becomes warmer, those bulbs will burst out in new life. That is the hidden action of the Creator. And the hidden action of the Creator is at work in our lives too. And all we need to do is slow down. All we need to do is listen. And all we need to do is trust that the source of all that is good, lasting, and true is bringing about a new work in us. So, my friends, my invitation to you is to keep slowing down whenever you can, and to listen with intention, and to trust that God's hidden work, hidden action, is bringing about a new work in us all. Thanks for tuning in, and be well.